Looks like everybody's about here. We'll go ahead and get started.
45 has changed a little. Yes.
So last week, we had talked about finding joy and peace in our circumstances. And the recurring theme of the book of Philippians is this theme of finding joy. And there's different, and Paul kind of navigates through different ways that we can be robbed of our joy and different things, different flags to be looking out for. So we're going to be in Philippians chapter 2 this morning. And we're actually going to start in chapter 1 in verse 27. And today we're going to be going through and looking at, maybe, we're going to be looking at finding joy through humility and how when we humble ourselves we can allow God to work through us. And so we start in chapter 1 in verse 27. It says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord with and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." And that little section there's got a lot to unpack, as do most of Paul's writing. Get this a little bit easier to navigate, so I'm not bending over all the time. So the first thing he says is to live and act in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ and not be intimidated by our opposition. So how do we act in accordance with the gospel? So what he wants is to be unified in mind, in spirit, in lost my place. I may hear that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving side by side for the faith. So he's teaching unity here, unity in the faith. Matthew Henry, a 18th century theologian, in his commentary said that those who oppose the gospel of Christ, and in his commentary on this verse here, those who oppose the gospel of Christ are marked out for ruin, but being persecuted is a token of salvation. We're going to go through persecutions. We're going to go through hard times. We are going to be attacked for our faith. We are going to struggle. And those struggles, those trials are, when we persevere through those, if we focus on God and we focus on Christ, then they're going to strengthen our faith. We've all seen what's going on in the news this week and what happened out in Utah. And there's a lot of divisiveness that's going on around that right now. But if we as believers, and this is what I've been working through myself this week, if we as believers can come together and we continue to strive, we can overcome the evil that is out there. Yeah. We can overcome the hate. And when it all comes down to it, God will win. And there are many circumstances. You look at Job, and Satan had to get God's permission to test Job. And so some people, I've heard it said that the more struggles we have, then the closer to God we are, because God's not going to, if Satan doesn't want the ones that don't have a relationship with God. He doesn't want them. He has them already. He has no need to go through and throw these obstacles in their way. But he's trying to come after us as believers. Our sufferings as a path to Christ. And in verse 27, where in mine, in the English Standard, says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy." That word that's used there is it means to, is defined as to conduct one's life, live or lead your life in a manner worthy. So that whether or not Paul goes back to Philippi, he's going to know that this seed that he planted is going to be growing. It has been bestowed upon us here in verse 29. It's been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him but also suffer for his sake. This word here, granted, it means to give freely as a favor or give graciously. So we have graciously been given the ability to suffer. It sounds, I kind of had the same reaction, like,
No thanks.
Right, well, thank you, right? Yeah. Thanks, I appreciate the pain and the suffering and all the hard times, but again, it's through those hard times that we can strengthen our relationship. James tells us, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Not free, but so, and he tells them, expect to suffer in some of the ways that I've suffered. They may not necessarily be thrown in prison, but they'll be ostracized from society. That being a Hellenized city, the city was named after Alexander the Great's father. So being a very Greek location, this new faith, this new teaching that's coming in, it's going against all of the Greek, going against this teaching of you've got the gods that are here and they're working, and you're teaching this strange, what Paul's talking about, you're teaching this strange new thing, this unknown God. And so in this city, they're risking being ostracized by their family to follow Christ. And so they're going to experience these hard times and these trials. Moving on to starting in verse 5. There's this section in verse 5 through 11. I think I skipped something. So what he's saying in here in verses 1 through 4 is his joy is completed. It says, complete my joy, fulfill my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind, as what Christ. If there is any of this in Christ, have that same love, have that same mind. And it all goes to the humility. In this Christ hymn, Paul goes through a section here, and a lot of people believe that this was sung as a hymn in the early church. But he talks about how Christ existed in the form of God. He was with God, going back to John 1. He was with God in the beginning. He was God. All things were created through him, but he emptied himself. Another way, one of the footnotes that in my Bible is when he emptied himself, he abandoned everything. He gave up all of his his heavenly advantages, so it says he did not He did not count his equality with God as something to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, or a form of a slave, that term doulos, but he emptied himself. And one of the notes here in my Bible says, kind of explains that as he gave up his divine privileges. I'm sorry, that's not the footnote, that is the New Living Translation. It says, instead he gave up his divine privileges, and he took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being, and when he appeared in human form. So he gave up everything, all the treasures that he had in heaven, all the glory, all the rank and the power and everything that he had, to come live as a man, to be born of a woman, and to live his life as a human being. But even by doing that, he continued to be completely obedient to the will of God, even to the point of death on the cross. And because of this, God highly exalted him above all else, above every position, above every rank or power. And then we have this quote from Isaiah, in his name, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And what Isaiah, what the original language actually says is, every tongue shall swear allegiance to God. And in doing that, what that's saying is, at the end, everybody's going to acknowledge who God is. Whether they have been saved, whether they have turned to God, whether they are unbelievers, everybody is going to know God. And every knee is going to bow to him. Every tongue will confess that he is God. But not everybody is going to enjoy the eternal rewards that we as Christians are going to get to. And when I was looking at this, and I know this is going to be kind of tongue-in-cheek, and in no way am I trying to equate people with Jesus. I want to get that disclaimer out there. When I thought about Jesus humbling himself and coming down, I thought of that. Y'all ever see that old show, Undercover Boss?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where you get CEOs that will disguise themselves and they go work as a fry cook at McDonald's, or they go and, because they're trying to get an idea on how the people that actually do the job day in and day out. Like I say, I'm not trying to equate them with Jesus. Because I know how things can get misunderstood sometimes. But that's what came to my mind, is because they were able to humble themselves and say, I want this company to run the best as possible. And the people that are actually making it run, I'm sitting in an office, I'm handling day to day, and it's not that there's not a lot of stuff that they have to do, but the people that are actually working out there, frying cooking the burgers, putting the fries in the fryer. I think I saw an episode where it was a manufacturing and assembly line where he's going out and he's putting equipment together and trying to find out what can be done to make their life and their jobs easier. And so, but what Jesus did was he came to humble himself so that he could die, and his blood would be that perfect sacrifice for us. And then we look at
the interesting thing about that, and I don't know if they show that I don't think I've ever watched those, but I don't think a lot of CEOs, a lot of them have never flipped a burger in their life, and they don't know how hard, they think that their job is harder than the person's job working on the front line or on the flip burgers. And maybe they edit these parts out of those episodes, but I wonder if they show the challenge that these bosses do. A lot of times, maybe they do, I think they actually do, where some of them will actually, they maybe get fired because they're just not cutting it for the job that they're trying to do. But we have a God, we have a Jesus that came down to earth and did the things that we do. He suffered like, well, even more than a lot of us suffered, and still was able to complete the task that he called us to do. So.
Absolutely, and that was, and that's kind of why I thought of that, was they went all the way down. They didn't take a management, they went all the way down to the bottom. They had to be, and they, whether they had done it or not, they went through the whole process of training and everything else. And that's, Jesus went through, we don't have records of it, but he went through adolescence. He went through teenage years. And I'm curious, I would love to know what happened in those teenage years. Was he your typical teenager, you know, trying to see what he could get away with? Was he?
No. He was teaching in the temple at 12.
Yeah, but, you know, there's a lot of that, and I agree to some extent, probably not. But they're also, I like to watch The Chosen, and one of the things that I like about it is it humanizes everybody, and it shows his human side. And there's a scene where they are in the Sea of Galilee just goofing off, having chicken fights and everything, and it reminds us that, yes, he was fully God, but he was also fully man. He had emotions. He felt happiness and joy. He felt sadness when Lazarus died. And so when he came, he became fully human, as well as being fully divine.
We think sometimes we want, he was in the temple, and so he's very holy. But to go to your point, he may have thought, I can take this shortcut, and then stop and say, would that be the best way to do it? Mm-hmm. And so his life is an example. Well, you can do it this way, but is this the best way? Mm-hmm. And he may have questioned himself because he was tempted like we are. So he had those temptations to do something. Well, I can do, I can save some nails instead of nailing. Mm-hmm. But is that the best thing?
Right.
And then go on and say, no, I'm going to do it the right way. I'm going to do it the way that will be better
Which is
than
not
I
typical of a teenager.
Right. It's not, and I think that's it. It's not that and I'm not trying to say that he was, the rule breaker, and it was later on that he became this divine presence. But the temptations were there. I mean, you saw it in the desert where Satan, and so Jesus himself wasn't even immune from Satan going after him, trying to say, you know what? You've been out here for 40 days. You've got to be hungry, right? I know your power. You can turn the rocks to bread. You can jump off there and God's going to save you because you know that it's not your time. And so there's this, so we look at this a lot of times, and we do understand, because we understand the divinity of Jesus, we sometimes tend to gloss over, I guess, the humanity of him. And so that's what I like about this passage, is that it shows that how much he gave up to become us, with all of the struggles and.
But see, that's the disconnect. When we lose sight of his humanity, how can we be like him? You see, his humanity is not typical, but it shows how you humble yourself. It's not hard to humble yourself, because when you realize you're powerless and you know nothing and you can do nothing right, that's pretty humbling if you face it. But that's the human side of this. He was tempted, yet without sin. So, you don't lose sight of the actual history, but you do want to, he didn't say, I'm doing this because I'm a good person. He said, I'm yielding to the Father. You can yield to the Father. I can yield to the Father. Everybody can yield to the Father. So you can be just like Jesus. That's all you have to do is yield to the Father. It's not his sinlessness that we're supposed to be emulating or imitating. It's his humility, and his faith in his Father. That's what Christianity is about.
I think, the Hebrews, 4:14, 4:15 and 16, so it says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Yet let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need," and which is exactly what Christ said.
That's humility.
And that's it. And, you know, to your point, how many times did he do something? Did he cast out a demon, or did he heal somebody that he told them, don't tell anybody? You know, he wasn't, I mean, we know that it wasn't his time, but he wasn't trying to broadcast, hey, everybody look at me, I'm the Son of God. And when he actually did that in Nazareth, he got run out of town. But this Christian humility and Christ's humility that we're supposed to emulate, I mean, how many times do we, even subconsciously sometimes, do it out of our selfish ambition, right? You know, I want that promotion because it's gonna help me here, or I want that job because it's gonna go with this. I want this family structure, because it's going to look good in this situation. It may not be a conscious decision, but there are often times that we do things with that in mind. And especially in my job, I have to be careful to not worry about my own selfish, because I'm not working for me. I'm working for the public, and I have to do things the right way. And that goes back to the cutting corners thing, is it can be done, but is it the right thing to do? And so, and I watch and make sure that I do things as best as I can, the absolute right way, because if I mess up, then I'm ruining somebody else's life. Literally, you know, they're gonna be spending years of their life trying to get back what I took away. And I take that very seriously. But
we can also recognize, and the older we are, the more this manifests itself. I've been doing a lot of manifesting lately. But there are times, we all know there were times in our lives when things we had to learn were difficult. Some of them were painfully difficult, and then others were, you know, I remember sitting in my algebra class trying to figure out how to factor trinomials in Mr. Madison's class, despite his good efforts. You know, and you sit back sometimes and say, this is hard. Well, of course, if it weren't hard, you wouldn't need somebody to teach it to you.
Right.
If you could just walk in and stick your finger in a light socket, and okay, I got everything I can leave today, that, you know, that would be wonderful, but it isn't. But it hurts sometimes to have to learn. Right now, I'm a retired teacher, but I still work with Harris County Department of Education with GED and ESL classes, and I'm a site manager for 2 sites, and we don't have enough teachers, and I have to teach one of the classes, and I remember teaching a GED class, and we would administer diagnostic tests so these students could see, because the first question is, how long is it going to take? You know, and you need to see where you are academically, and so our diagnostic tests, you know, if you're up here, we say, go take the test now, you don't need this class, and others were down here. And one fellow said, man, it's gonna take me 3 years to get my GED. And I said, okay, 3 years compared to what? Never? I mean, compared to never, 3 years doesn't sound bad. You just dedicate yourself to doing it. And sometimes we have to, through frustration, just say, do I have to do this? Well, the answer is, yeah. You can't learn. Well, I mean, what can you learn without, I mean, 90% of everything, and I'm not being facetious, 90% of everything I know because I did it wrong the first time. There was a guy who had his car, you ever see a car with one tire straight and one tire almost sideways in the middle of an intersection because he was going around the corner and suddenly the tire falls off? And I was talking to him, I said, when you go over speed bumps, you go over fast or slow? And he said, I go over them fast. And I said, why? And he said, because you don't speed on them. I said, the ball's on his feet. Now, I would love for him to think, I'm so smart, I know about that. When I pulled off the freeway in my old F-150 pickup truck, and I had a shimmy on the front end and pulled over, and I had a crooked tire, and the tow truck driver said, you go over the speed bump, potholes, you go over fast or slow, and I said, I'll go over fast. And he said, I said, why? I said, because I'm your own speed limit. He said, the ball's on the speed limit. Okay, that's the only way I'd love for you to think I'm such a great mechanic, but everything I know just about, it was difficult to learn, whether it was something in school or something in life. And I sometimes think, I'm a Christian now, so everything's going to be easy for me. Oh, please.
I'm going into that. I'm going into that. Everything's gonna be easy when we become a Christian, I guess. Because I was young, you think you're gonna change the world, and then it's like, oh, snap.
Well, and I think that the younger we are when we baptized and when we become Christians, the more likely it is we're gonna feel that way because, okay, I'm a Christian now, I've been baptized, God's gonna take care of me, God's gonna help, and yes, God's gonna take care of us, but that doesn't mean it's not gonna get hard.
Yeah, before we leave you as an example, I like you as an example in your job. But it was something you didn't mention that I'm gonna mention about your job, and that's you've been given authority. And so it's a fine line in exercising that authority and being humble. So that's why the focus has to be glorifying God.
Mm-hmm.
See, either, whichever one you're doing, as long as glorifying God is your objective, you're humbling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But you absolutely have to exercise authority, and people have to respect that authority, or you have to do other things that you might not wanna do. So, that's a fine line. You have a very hard job.
Well, and
Sometimes thankless.
it can be, but, I tell you, I don't do it for that. But what I will say is, I learned a long time ago, there's a difference between power and authority. Authority is something that is granted to you.
Right.
And you have been given that to exercise. Power is something, it may have been granted, you may have attained the authority and been granted authority, but power is something generally that's taken. And I've seen it with people I work with, some closely, some just from afar, but they toe that line between power and authority, and they get on these trips, and that's where I make sure that I have to humble myself, because I can only worry about me. I can try to stop somebody from taking that power and exerting power instead of authority, but when it comes down to it, I have to worry about me. And I have to make sure that all I'm doing is what is right according to the Bible, according to Scripture. Because at the end of the day, God's the one that I have to answer to.
Yeah.
And that goes true with teachers. There's a tremendous amount of expectations and authority granted to teachers. And my wife teaches first grade, and I absolutely could not teach first grade. She loves it. She is great at it. The kids love her. That is not something that my personality could handle. Because they're active, they talk, they're gross.
So you're describing my age group as high school, same thing, they're just bigger kids.
Well, and I was just about to say, I don't know that they get less gross as they become
No,
teenagers.
they just get more.
Even to the adults, really,
But it is something, and being a parent has made me appreciate God, Jesus' relationship with God and God's relationship with Jesus so much more. But even more so, it's made me appreciate what God has done for me more. Because there are a lot of times when I look at my kids, I'm like, how many times have I told you not to do that? And, you know, you're 10 years old, and I've been telling you for 10 years that this is what you're supposed to do, and you're still not doing it. And being in my 40s now, and how many times has God said, don't do that? How many times have I been faced with situations that you're not supposed to do that? You're not, and, I was one that always had to learn the hard way too. My dad used to always joke about, when he would give speeches to the teacher organization he was part of, he would start it out by using me as an example of being on the career plan in college, because I was 6 years in as a sophomore. It took me, I finally got my bachelor's degree a month before my oldest son was born, after almost 10 years. And so there were a lot of things that I had to learn the hard way, and some things I didn't learn, I just memorized enough to get through the test. But I understand better now why my own father and why God gives us these outlines. They've got this, and they say, okay, this is what you're supposed to do, this is how you're supposed to act, this is what you're supposed to strive for. But there's that understanding that there's a path when we fail. Not if, but when we fail to achieve that, there is a path still to God, and there is a path to forgiveness. And that's the example that Paul's using here, is Jesus came so that we would have a path to that salvation. And he's talking, back here earlier, he was talking about working out salvation. Because it's not something that just, it happens, but it's not something to just, oh, I was saved and now I get to move on. It is always, you're working it out, you're always growing, and you're always learning.
So, yeah, I didn't mean to stop in mid-sentence or anything. But yeah, I mean, and I think one of the things that always found fascinating is like the job of, I hear about the job of acting and that sort of thing. And everyone wants to do acting to achieve fame and fortune and everything like that. But the people that are successful, the ones that you actually see that are famous and wealthy, are the ones that enjoy the acting and enjoy the process of the acting, enjoy the 50 takes, and
Right.
not just enjoy the one time it was right. They enjoy the whole process. And I think in our life, we struggle with that as well. We want the success. We want the end goal. We want our child to finally do the thing that we've been asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you gotta love the process, because that is life. Life is getting up to the goal, not the goal itself.
Right.
Because you'll never really attain the goal, because there's always gonna be another goal.
Mm-hmm. And we will not achieve perfection in this life. And regardless of how much, and that is why Jesus came, was because there was no way to live and fulfill and obey the entire law for the span of an entire life. And so Jesus came as that sacrifice, and he came as that pathway to that salvation. And I like where that actually leads into this next section. If we look at verses 12 through 18, he says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain, even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you should also be glad and rejoice with me. So, continue working out your salvation with fear and trembling. This one, this translation says, there's some that I saw, this one says fear and trembling. Thought it said something different. I've seen some that use variations of awe, reverence, but this is literally translated as fear and trembling. Why should fear and trembling be a part of our salvation?
Because it's God that's working on us, and we should fear getting in the way of what he's trying to accomplish and achieve in us, and we often do.
Yes. I would say we spend more time in his way than letting him work. And I use that generally, but I say that because we all understand we are a fallen people. We are human, we are imperfect, and so without God, there's no way to achieve that end goal. And so with God working in us, if we get out of his way, then it'll be okay.
And two, the other fear is without him working, we won't even want to do his will. That's the second part. We wouldn't even want to do it. So that's pretty fearful to find ourselves in a place where we don't even want to do his will.
I like the New Living Translation in verse 13. It says, "For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power." And though that puts those two things together, I want it, and because of him, I can. So it puts that together.
I think also to help understand this verse, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, just look at what the antithesis of that is. Right. What if it read, work out your salvation with confidence and arrogance?
Right.
That would be bad, right? I mean, that would be a terrible way to approach salvation. It'd be the opposite. So with fear and trembling is the opposite of that.
It is. And like Jamil said, I mean, there should be that fear that for God to, that fear of getting it wrong. And so.
Could fear mean respect? You
It-
respect the teachings of God and tremble?
So there are shades of fear, but this specifically is that phobos fear, that it's that like paralyzing, that fear of, cause that's what, when I started reading other things, different translations, and seeing that it was translated different, that's when I went back to the original, and it is that phobos, that fear, almost a paralyzing fear. I mean, that's where we get the term phobia. And so there are times when, yes, it is that, and it's a healthy fear. It's a healthy fear of God. I believe here, but it is still that fear, that trembling, that let me not get this wrong. Let me make sure that I'm walking, and letting God work in me.
As I say, it's a fear and trembling of the consequences of failure. Far be it for me to add words to the Bible, but, if you just added fear and trembling of the consequences of my failure to attain that salvation, that's, to me, that's where it comes from. That's what it's alluding to, is the opposite, and almost even the way you're saying there, that it's a way of, to me, my salvation is joyful. I'm excited for that. I'm trembling with excitement. But if I fail, it is the most serious failure that I can possibly have.
Absolutely.
So sometimes we come across words that we have a difficult time recognizing the original definition. I mean, I look at the word awful, and King James Version of the Bible, I can't remember, it's been so long since I looked at it. Somewhere in the Old Testament, refers to the awful presence of God. And I remember as a teenager reading that saying, the awful presence of God? That's not awful, what are you talking about? Well, then you learn the etymology of the word, and back in the days of building these huge cathedrals and these towns that, the tallest building was my attic, and then this huge skyscraper comes along, and they were designed, as you walked in with all the stained glass windows and all the ornate, everything, as you walked in, everything was, literally, they were designed to make you do this, and go, and it's onomatopoeia, that sound is the origin of the word, awe, where it's awe-inspiring. The awful presence of God originally meant the awesome presence of God. That we use the word awful, we used then the word awful, like we use the word joyful, full of joy. Careful, full of care. Awful, full of awe and respect. And language is dynamic, it's not static, it changes from generation to generation. First time I heard a student in my class say, "Oh, that's bad," and I said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" And he said, "No, that's bad." And I said, "Yeah, I heard you, what's wrong with it?" He said, "No, that's bad," which was a way of saying, "That's good." I'm thinking, okay, I missed a little on that one, but,
Yeah.
but the language is dynamic, it changes, so sometimes we need to be careful what we read into them with our own.
Well, even the word, hypocrite, what we think of as a hypocrite now, the original meaning of that was simply an actor.
Who's pretending to be something he isn't.
Right, and it became a negative connotation, but originally it was just a term that would be used like actor or thespian or whatever, and it was just, it was a description, it was an adjective, it wasn't.
Here is why we don't like the word fear. We think it's absent of love and respect. But if your parent told you, don't do a certain thing, and you know not to do it, and you know how they feel about it, and then if you was gonna reach and do it, and you looked up and saw your parent, what you would feel right then is terrible. It wouldn't be respect, it wouldn't be love, it would be terror. But you love your parent and you respect your parent, but sometimes you do things that they told you like you said, time and time again not to do, because you're not around them. But if they looked up and saw you, even a little bitty baby, if you look and they see you, they'll snatch their hand back, because that fear is there. So it's not an ugly word, it's reality. The thing is, a lot of times we do wanna kind of play it down because we don't fear God, because he's such a good, loving God. Yeah, but he's against sin, and he has a wrath that we've been spared from if we stay in tune with the fact that he's working in us and keep that fear. But the word is good, like you said, for us. It's not, it's a terror.
It is, and, and sometimes we just have to learn that hard lesson, but, one of my dad's favorite stories to tell was how I learned what hot meant. When I was about 2 years old, he had been out mowing the yard, and I went out, the lawnmower was still hot. Well, I walked over to it, and he's telling me, "Don't touch it, it's hot. Don't touch it, it's hot." Well, me being the perfect listener that I've never been, I reached down and grabbed the muffler and figured out what hot meant. But he let me, he's like, I'm gonna tell him it's hot, don't do it, but now I don't know if I can get away with that now with my kids, but this was many moons ago. But I do like this idea that it's the fear of the consequences, it's the fear, because we want to do the right thing, and I think most people innately want to do the right thing. But if we have these fear of the consequences, it's more likely that we're going to go, okay, and do a risk analysis on that. Okay, if I do this, what are the potential consequences? Okay, I don't want to do that. Some people do that to more extent than others, but God works in us to will and act in his good pleasure to do. What I like about verse 14, it reminds me, I was on a mission trip with my youth group in high school. We were going out to New Mexico, and we stopped in Santa Fe. And all things without grumbling or disputing in order to remain pure. This will always stick in my mind. We were in Santa Fe, we went to a restaurant, and it was a Mexican restaurant, but it was New Mexico Mexican food. It was not what we were used to here in Texas.
Yeah.
And it was different. We didn't particularly, the teenagers didn't particularly care for it as much. And we voiced our opinions, but not to the restaurant. It wasn't their fault, but we voiced our opinions to the adults that were there. And so the next morning, the devotional before we left to continue on our journey was from this passage right here. And I will never forget sitting around the fountain at this hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with our preacher, Scott Clark, reminding us, it's gonna be okay. You don't have to grumble about it. It's okay to not like things. It's okay to be dissatisfied, but you have to move past it. And there are a few things that stand out in that way, but that was one of those moments that I will never forget. And I mentioned it to my mom last week. She was on the trip, and she remembered it and got a good chuckle out of it, because it was just, looking back, I can understand why he did that. He didn't want us to ruin the rest of the trip because we were upset at this. And there were some great things that happened on that trip. But that would take us way far off course here. But we're supposed to remain a light in the world, even though we live in a crooked and perverse world. So we want to continue working, letting God be that light. And specifically, when you're looking at the church, they were in this Greek city. There was a lot of idolatry. There was a lot of different actions that were and beliefs that were going on that were counterculture to what Christianity is. And so what Paul was reminding them was, continue what I've taught and be a light to them, and let's hope that they come and follow you rather than continuing to follow the idolatry. And it says, hold fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain, or labor in vain. Even if I'm poured out as a drink offering, upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you should also be glad and rejoice with me. I had to read that several times, because what I kept reading was, hold this so that I don't look bad. And I knew that that wasn't what Paul was saying, but that's what kept coming to my mind, is I want to be proud that I didn't run in vain or labor in vain. And when I started looking at different things and reading a couple of commentaries to kind of get me off that train of thought, this is what he was saying here. We have, you as a teacher, you wanted your students to be successful. And as parents, we want our children to be successful, partially because it reflects on us, but we want to make sure that we instilled in them the tools to be successful members of society. And that's what Paul is saying here. It's not about his own selfishness so that he can say, look what I did. It's so that he can say, okay, it worked. I got something there. I want to make sure that my being with you and spending time with you and helping you establish that church, I want the kingdom to grow. I want Christianity, I want the church to grow. And we have here where he's talking about, even if I'm sacrificed. he still didn't know what was gonna happen to him. He was facing potential execution and martyrdom, at this point. And so he's letting them know, even if I can't be with you, even if I get sacrificed for this, I am joyful and I rejoice in what we've done and what we've established. And I want you to rejoice with me in that. I want you to have that same level of joy. Especially since, like, going to, just a little bit earlier, you're gonna have some hard times. So keep my joy, rejoice the way I rejoice with me. And then, it will help get you, when you focus yourself and humble yourself, God will guide you and lead you out of these challenges and into some new ones. All right, 7 minutes. Let's see how much I can get done in there. So we've got Timothy and Epaphroditus. And so why would Paul want to send Timothy to Philippi? If you look in verses 19 through 30, he says he wants to send Timothy to them. And so he kind of outlines it. There was nobody there like Timothy. So from this, we can surmise that maybe there were other people that were with him, whether they were other Christians or prisoners, but there was somebody, at least one other person that may have been free to leave to go to Philippi, but he wanted to send Timothy because there was nobody there like him. He had proven faithful. He was trusted by Paul. Because he doesn't seek his own interest. And he served Paul like a child serving a father. And that goes back to what we were talking about with parenthood and everything. When you see little kids and they're trying to do what their parents do, and especially when you have little boys, they want to be like dad. They want to do what dad's doing. And so they're going to be learning and studying. And my own son, I was cooking stuff out on the smoker a few weeks ago, and he's like, "Can I help you?" "Absolutely, come on." And he's like, "What do you do?" And I was showing him how to light it, how to adjust temperatures, and he wanted to learn. And that's kind of the way I imagine Timothy here, is he's soaking in everything Paul is telling him about the faith. Because Timothy was from, I believe it was Lystra. And Paul picked him up around Acts 16. And he had been traveling and learning, and so this was where Timothy was from. He had a Jewish mother and a Greek father, and so he knew a little bit about Judaism, but this Christianity thing was new. He was soaking in everything, doing what he could for Paul, so Paul wanted to send him as his messenger to Philippi because he knew that the message that was going to be sent was going to be the right one, and it wasn't going to get twisted, or it wasn't going to, and it was actually going to get delivered. And then we have Epaphroditus. Everything we know about Epaphroditus is right here. This is the only time that I could find where he's actually mentioned. But he came to Paul from Philippi. He brought him a message in Rome. And so it doesn't say if he was from Philippi or if he was just connected with the church, if he was maybe from somewhere else and traveling through Philippi and they said, "Hey, we need to deliver a message to Paul." None of that is real clear. But he was a messenger. And he had gotten deathly sick when he got to Rome, which troubled the Philippians, which had this close relationship with him. And so they got concerned about him and were praying for him. And so Paul wants to send Epaphroditus back because the best I could figure, if he doesn't want their concern for Epaphroditus so that they can see him, they can rejoice in his recovery and rejoice in him, with him. But he would worry, it says that it will, he'll be less anxious if they rejoice with Epaphroditus, because what I can gather is that their worry is a distraction. If they're so concerned about him, they're not gonna be out doing the work. And so says, receive him with all joy and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. So that was another one that I kind of struggled with a little bit, lacking in your service, and to complete, as if there was something missing, but it was with Epaphroditus, we all have a role and we all have an ability, and if David leaves, we're gonna have to fill that void. We're gonna have to have somebody that preaches. If Derek leaves, there's somebody that has to fill that. And so it's incomplete until until all those pieces are in place. And that is what I'm reading here. But again, I'm not always right on, and sometimes I read too much into things. Okay, we're right about out of time. Does anybody have?
A couple things that I think it's worth pointing out in this hymn kind of thing in verse 6 through 8. I think it's interesting in there talking about the connection between this passage and how Jesus lived and the Garden of Eden. It says he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped. But what did Eve do? She wanted to be like God and grasp that fruit and take it. And then taking and becoming obedient to death. You know, what were the consequences of taking that fruit? It was death. So Jesus took on everything all the curse that man had taken on by being humbled and obedient to death. The second thing is in that passage about working out your faith, I've never really liked that expression, working out. So much against what Paul has always taught. You know, we don't work really for our salvation. But I think another way to translate that word is to do your salvation, or to live out your salvation with fear and trembling. And because it says it's God that's in us. And I think that's worth really pondering what the connotations of that really are. You know, things that we do to act out and earn, or to act out and to do our salvation. We need to be concerned because it is God that's in us that's working those things through. It's kind of, I don't know. It's always made me want to stop and think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, there's some things, and I ran across a YouTube video the other day, and I can't think of the page, but it was a guy. He is a former Christian and now atheist agnostic, and he had had Bart Ehrman on, and they were talking about some guy that had disagreed with Ehrman on things, and but when he was talking about one of the things that he does, so he's a theology professor, I think at the University of North Carolina, was once a Christian writer and professor, and then has since strayed, and he's more, I think he describes himself as an agnostic atheist. I didn't realize that those two things went together, but one of the things that he does is he is not a atheistic professor or writer who degrades the faith. What he does is he teaches from a strictly historical and literary standpoint of the Bible. But what he was saying was, one of the things that he does in his class is he'll have his students read the birth narrative in Matthew and the birth narrative in Luke, and then explain without, strictly from the text. If you were only reading Luke, well, why didn't Jesus go to Egypt? And so I like that he makes people think, but, and I think the thinking is part of the process, but what I don't like is that he's trying to, that he tries to say that, oh, well, it has to be, it can only be one or the other, like there's no possible legitimate explanation on that. And so that working out the faith, I think that's what they're talking about is, you know, work out, study, you know, work through difficult questions, difficult issues and situations, because we're all gonna have them. And even John the Baptist sent people to Jesus saying, look, I'm about to die for this. Are you sure? So,
But at the same time, we have congregations, I worshiped in an ultra conservative congregation that used chapter 2, verse 2, make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of mind, one mind, not being contentious, literally preaching from the pulpit. If you disagree with anything we say or do here, you need to go someplace else to worship. So I did. Surely we can discuss the scriptures and we can have a difference of opinion, but that was so adamant. No discussion, no being argumentative or anything. You agree with us, or you go someplace else. So, I did.
and you look, just in this room alone, everybody in here is going to read differently, is going to understand this differently, and there's gonna be differences of opinions. And yes, don't be contentious, don't be, you know, it's not about being argumentative, but I've been in those same congregations, and we got up and walked out when he gave that invitation. Well, if you don't believe and worship in the Church of Christ, you're going to hell. Well, now my wife now is here at Bambles. We're members, and she's active here. But at the time, we were newly married. We were looking for a place to go. She was still kind of holding on a little bit to her Catholic upbringing, and so we got up and was like, nope, that's not the place, because it's not factual, it's not biblical. For one, the Church of Christ as we know it didn't exist in the first century, nor did the Roman Catholic, but and so I've heard those same sermons, I've been in those same churches, and I've never agreed that this is about not disagreeing on things. The like-minded is have a mind for Jesus, have a heart for God, be united in the faith, and that's what it all comes down to. That's where the unity comes in. So, all right, ran a little over. I'm gonna go ahead and say a prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you for everything that you've given us, and we're thankful for this time that we have to come together to study and to worship. And Father, we ask that you be with all those who are hurting and suffering, and the families that are hurting this week, and we ask that you be with our nations and our community leaders as they navigate these events of the week, and we ask you to be with our church leadership and guide this body. And Father, we ask that you continue to be with all of us in our walk throughout this earth, and forgive us for our sins. In Jesus' name, amen.